Story 1. A small bakery accident in Thomas Farriner's shop, possibly just an unattended oven or candle, set off the Great Fire of London. It destroyed most of the medieval city but led to a better planned modern London afterward. One baker forgot to blow out a flame. Goodbye, London. Story 2. The discovery of X-rays. Wilhelm Röntgen noticed a screen glowing by accident while experimenting with cathode rays and realized he was observing something completely new. Story 3. In late World War II, Americans were worried that the Germans would start deploying chemical weapons against Allied soldiers in Europe. The United States secretly shipped a shipment of mustard gas munitions to a port in the United States-controlled part of Italy, just in case they needed them. The German Air Force unexpectedly arrived and bombed a ship loaded with mustard gas, which exploded spectacularly. Hundreds died, and thousands suffered severe chemical burns and poisoning. Doctors struggled to treat the wounded because the United States military would not disclose what their patients were exposed to, as the mustard gas program was top secret. Intense studies on how this chemical affects the human body followed. It was discovered that the chemical kills cancerous cells much faster than healthy cells. Researchers realized they could deliberately expose cancer patients to a diluted version of this chemical to treat cancer. Chemotherapy was invented. Story 4. In 1945, Percy Spencer was standing near a magnetron, and the candy bar in his pocket started to melt. Now we can all have cold food in hot bowls as a result. Story 5. An East German official was meant to say they were easing travel restrictions over time. He accidentally said they were easing them immediately, and the Berlin Wall was mobbed by joyful people, becoming one of the major events of German reunification and helping trigger other events that led to the end of the Cold War. Story 6. Poland's Solidarity movement started when a shipyard director tried to fire a cleaning lady close to retirement because she voiced her anger about food shortages. The Solidarity movement in Poland was also a defining moment in the fall of the communist regimes in Eastern Europe. Story 7. The Guy Plunkett trying to create a new refrigerant for DuPont found his experiment had polymerized. BAM, tetrafluoroethylene, also known as Teflon, was discovered. This led to the advent of forever chemicals, which are now found on every continent, in every drop of rain, in most animals, and appear to be reducing fertility across all species. Story 8. A man fell onto a beer bottle and caused the collapse of Yugoslavia. Story 9. Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction at the 2004 National Football League halftime show played a significant role in the creation of YouTube. The founders were frustrated by their inability to find the video online, so they decided to create their own video sharing site. Much of modern culture stems from YouTube, including influencer and content creator culture, our consumption of video content on social media, and how studios and record labels sell their products. Even Facebook timed its release a few days after the incident to capitalize on the publicity using the site. Story 10. That fish decided to get a better look at what is happening on land. Story 11. An assassin stopped for a sandwich, then saw his target driving past him in an open-topped car, having taken a wrong turn. And that is how World War I kicks off. Story 12. Fermentation, alcohol, dough, and cheese were all key survival elements. Story 13. The molasses flood of Boston is significant. It led to modern engineering requirements and building codes. These have saved tens of thousands to millions of lives in the last 106 years. Story 14. Not an accident per se, but some sailor in the 1600s tried giant tortoise meat, and now we do not have dodos. Story 15. In 1945, at the Soviet Embassy compound in Ottawa, Canada, the wife of a senior official complained about the crying baby next door and asked her husband to have the family moved elsewhere. Since there were no other rooms at the compound, the baby's father, a cipher clerk named Igor Gazenko, was permitted to move his family into an apartment offsite. After he and his wife, who was pregnant with their second child, experienced a very different kind of life in Canada and fearing his impending recall to the Soviet Union, Gazenko eventually stole a stack of papers from the embassy and offered them to the Canadian government in exchange for sanctuary for him and his family. The papers revealed that the Soviets had built up an extensive spy ring in Canada and the United States, even when they were supposedly wartime allies. This incident helped kick off the Cold War and the Red Scare and likely would not have happened if Kazenko and his family were still living on the compound. Story 16. In the beginning, the universe was created. This has made many people very angry and is widely regarded as a bad move. Douglas Adams. Story 17. Some man in the Middle East contracted tapeworms by not cooking pork properly. Now, 1/3 of the world population avoids eating it. Story 18. One joke annoyed a millionaire enough to run for president out of spite. Story 19. Charlie biting his brother's finger. The internet would have been shut down by now if that had not happened. Story 20. I do not understand why the answer to this question is not always Ørsted's compass. Ørsted was preparing to give a lecture. He was going to talk about electricity and magnetism. When he accidentally completed a circuit near a compass on the table, the compass needle jumped. This moment showed humanity that electricity and magnetism were connected. From that unexpected jump of the compass needle came every generator and electric motor we use today. Story 21. When some early human cave dweller thought, I wonder what will happen if I rub these two sticks together vigorously? Story 22. However, the first COVID-19 patient zero has to be among the earliest cases. Story 23. Accident. Franz Ferdinand's driver took a wrong turn in Sarajevo in 1914. Result. Car stalled near assassin Gavrilo Princip. Impact. Archduke and his wife were shot and killed. Chain reaction. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. World War I begins. Over 16 million deaths. Fall of 4 empires. Russian Revolution leads to the rise of communism. Harsh Treaty of Versailles imposed. Adolf Hitler rises to power. World War II and the Holocaust occur. Cold War and nuclear arms race follow. Modern global tensions are shaped. One wrong turn led to a century of global chaos. Story 24. Pfizer was working on blood pressure medication and accidentally discovered Viagra. Story 25. There was an Austrian painter who was rejected by the Vienna School of Fine Arts. Story 26. That man who spilled his Pepsi on the console at 3 Mile Island. Story 27. Probably the Titanic. Just one ship not slowing down for ice warnings, and it changed history. A single iceberg hit turned into one of the most famous disasters ever. Then, fast forward a century and people repeat history with OceanGate. Story 28. The simple act of doctors and ordinary people washing their hands, especially when in contact with blood, has saved billions of lives throughout history. Story 29. Around 12,000 years ago, long before kings, cities, or farms, a foraging woman wandered the fields near her clan's camp. She gathered nuts, berries, and wild grains, food she knew her people could eat. On the way back, some slipped from her bundle into the mud. Maybe she didn't notice. Maybe the ground was too wet to bother picking them up. Either way, she moved on. Weeks later, her clan returned to the old campsite. Walking the same path, she saw something new. The very plants she once harvested were sprouting where she had dropped her food. Then she had an idea. From one accident, spilled seeds, came the realization that the earth itself could be persuaded to feed us. With that discovery, the long wandering of humankind began to end. Story 30. The human race surviving any mass extinction event and then influencing all of history, nature, and the future, even though it was not initially part of the event, will eventually be part of the question. Story 31. The Black Plague in the 14th century. Some historians trace its spread in Europe to fleas on black rats that accidentally hitched rides on merchant ships. That tiny accident in shipping spread the plague and wiped out 1/3 of Europe's population. Story 32. The addition of sulfur to natural rubber was discovered by Charles Goodyear. He accidentally dropped a mixture of rubber and sulfur onto a hot stove, discovering that it hardened and became elastic and durable. Story 33. 1,000 years ago in China, an alchemist was mixing ingredients to create a life-extending potion. He heated the mixture, which caught on fire and burned violently. Boom! Primitive gunpowder was invented. Story 34. Probably tossing discarded seeds into a spot where they would sprout, not get buried by more trash. and then being found later when in full growth by someone who recognized that they could grow their food on purpose. Story 35. Small fry. But Nintendo asked Sony to develop a compact disc drive for their Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Nintendo pulled out, but Sony thought, we've come this far, let's refine it and release it. Hence, the PlayStation. Without Nintendo's invitation, Sony would not be in the video game business. Story 36. A woman in the Middle East was unfaithful to her husband, became pregnant, and founded a major world religion. Story 37. It was thousands of years ago that Yuji the caveman accidentally left some fruit out in the sun, perhaps in a primitive pot, and it went rotten in the sun. Instead of throwing it away like a normal person, he drank the foul-smelling concoction, vomited profusely, staggered around for a few hours, then slept for a full day, awakening with a crushing headache. Somehow, he then persuaded all his friends to try it. Thus, alcohol was invented. Story 38. The killing of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the setting of World War I. Imagine the driver taking a wrong turn, which gave Princip a second chance to shoot him. Story 39. Albert Hoffman spilling a couple of drops of lysergic acid diethylamide on his hand. He decided to lick his hand for science and document how he felt. He was affected by a remarkable restlessness, combined with slight dizziness. At home, he lay down and sank into a not unpleasant intoxicated-like condition, characterized by an extremely stimulated imagination. In a dreamlike state, with eyes closed, he found the daylight to be unpleasantly glaring. He perceived an uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures, extraordinary shapes with intense, kaleidoscopic play of colors. After about 2 hours, this condition faded away. Story 40. A scientist using a screwdriver to test a radioactive core gave us a look at what radiation poisoning can do to the human body. Story 41. Not quite an accident, but in 1940, the French spotted almost the entire German army near the Ardennes in an area of a few square miles. The French commander dismissed the intelligence report as false. The opportunity to end World War II before it began was missed. Story 42. In high school, I stood there and watched as one friend tried to scare my other friend while he was riding by on a tote goat, a little homemade moped welded together from a lawnmower motor. This resulted in the burning of approximately 220 acres of property in Ramona, California. I believe the year was 2005. A few years ago, I looked it up on the California fire map. Story 43. Two people bumped into each other, and one man's chocolate bar landed in the other man's peanut butter. Story 44. If no one mentions it here, it is on the old show Connections. Check it out. It will leave you stunned at how random human destiny has been. Story 45. Attenuated virus vaccines. A scientist left a culture of chicken cholera virus in broth for a long time because he forgot about it and wondered what would happen if he injected it into a chicken. The result was a very mild illness followed by full immunity. Story 46. Maybe Teflon? The effect has been comparatively minimal at this point, but if it is a true forever chemical and is causing all the problems that we are just starting to notice, it could have incredible lasting impacts on humans. Story 47. When Thag or the Gina was striking two rocks together, sparks flew. Story 48. In the top 10. Mrs. O'Leary's cow. Story 49. Fred Trump not using protection that one time. Maybe not an accident, but it certainly had an impact. Story 50. Percy Spencer's melted chocolate bar, 1945. Percy Spencer was working on radar technology when his chocolate bar melted in his pocket due to microwaves from the magnetron. Instead of being annoyed, he became curious and conducted experiments. Result: the microwave oven was invented. Impact: revolutionized cooking and food preparation. Enabled the fast food industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Changed kitchen design permanently. Helped more women enter the workforce by reducing cooking time. Transformed how humanity eats. One melted candy bar literally changed how billions of people prepare food. It makes you wonder what random accidents happening right now will reshape society in 50 years. Story 51. I would say penicillin. My father, who is 97, Had a brother who died in 1930 from dysentery. Perhaps antibiotics would have saved him. Story 52. The first bombing of the central areas of London by the German Air Force on August 24, 1940, is often assumed to have occurred by accident. The bombers had been supposed to attack the Thames docks but went off course due to a navigational error and dropped their bombs on a residential area. The following night, the British launched a retaliatory raid on Berlin, which angered Adolf Hitler and Hermann Göring and caused a major shift in their strategy. Previously, the German Air Force had been attacking British airbases and aircraft manufacturing plants, putting considerable strain on the Royal Air Force. Now the Germans started deliberately targeting major cities known as the London Blitz instead. While devastating for the civilian population, this did not advance their military objectives. Instead, the Royal Air Force found the pressure it had been under lifted, was able to rebuild, train new pilots, and eventually frustrate the Germans' attempt to bomb Britain into submission. German losses mounted, and eventually the campaign and invasion plans were shelved. Britain remained free and eventually became the major launching pad for the liberation of Europe on D-Day. Story 53. The Great Seattle Fire of 1889 happened because a carpenter's glue pot boiled over, and he made the mistake of dousing the grease fire with water. Story 54. A gas explosion at the school in New London, Texas, in 1937 that killed 295 students and teachers is the reason that natural gas has a detectable smell today. Prior to that, it was odorless. Story 55. The experimental insertion of a xenon crystal into an antimatter mass spectrometer at the Black Mesa Research Facility. Story 56. After the first assassin threw a grenade at Archduke Franz Ferdinand's motorcade, but missed the intended target, Franz Ferdinand took refuge at Sarajevo City Hall. He then decided to go to the hospital to visit the injured. On the way, his driver took a wrong turn and ended up reversing the car right in front of where Gavrilo Princip was standing. Princip then drew a pistol and killed both the Archduke and his wife, setting off a chain reaction that unleashed the First World War and dramatically shaped the entire 20th century, with consequences still felt today because of a driver's wrong turn. Story 57. When the end of the Civil War was near, Captain William Parmenter sneezed, abruptly seized the retreat, and reversed it to victory. Story 58. Rubber vulcanization. Charles Goodyear, while already going in the right direction with sulfur, discovered the heat treatment process by accidentally leaving a sheet of raw rubber mixed with sulfur too close to his stove. He then tested the properties of what would become the basis of modern rubber, paving the way for most advancements made in the past 150 years, including rubber gloves and rubber bushings in mechanical systems. Story 59. Maybe that one man who was not accepted into an art university in Austria. Story 60. In 1983, Stanislav Petrov assumed the blips on his radar were an error. This very error he refused to report prevented the feared nuclear war between the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the United States of America. Because he said, "No, just a faulty blip." The war never transpired. Story 61. Roy Cohn met Donald Trump by chance at a nightclub in New York. Every unethical tactic Donald Trump uses, he learned from Roy Cohn. Story 62. Possibly Joe Biden getting a cold in June 2024, not because I think the debate would have had an appreciable impact on his re-election odds, but because it led to his last-minute dropout. Story 63. What about that time someone threw a sandwich at a police officer and started a revolution because he was federally charged with a crime? Oh wait, that did not happen yet. Story 64. In Palm Beach County, Florida, election officials decided to try a new butterfly-style ballot for the 2000 presidential election. Story 65. The one man on the Titanic with keys to the binocular box getting off the ship at the last stop before heading to New York. Story 66. Someone hands Hong Xiuquan a Bible. 30 million perish. Chinese history is strange. Story 67. Fred F. Stone noticed that it is easier to roll the tree trunk along the ground than to cut it into smaller pieces and then carry it. Story 68. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's driver took a wrong turn after the failed assassination attempt and stopped to turn around right in front of the sandwich shop where Gavrilo Princip was. Story 69. The one person who prevented nuclear war during the Cold War when the Soviets mistakenly thought the United States was attacking. Story 70. One time a driver made a wrong turn in 1914, and then 100 million people died. Story 71. A simple wrong turn. In 1914, after Gavrilo Princip failed to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand with a grenade, he went to a cafe to mope about his failed attempt. Ferdinand decided to continue his Sarajevo trip, but when his driver realized he had made a wrong turn, he decided to turn back and stalled right in front of the cafe where Princip was. This gave Princip another successful assassination attempt which triggered World War I. Story 72. Certainly not as good as antibiotics, but I do like the rubber story. Natural rubber, as it was once known, was of limited usefulness to industry. Rubber products melted in hot weather, froze and cracked in cold, and adhered to virtually everything until the mid-19th century, when inventor Charles Goodyear accidentally dropped some rubber mixed with sulfur on a hot stove. Goodyear's discovery, which came to be known as vulcanization, strengthened rubber so it could be applied to a vast variety of industrial uses, including, eventually, automobile tires. Story 73. Franz Ferdinand's driver took a wrong turn and ended up right in front of assassin Gavrilo Princip, resulting in the death of the Crown Prince. This event was the spark that started World War I. Story 74. Someone suggested the idea that a group of people should write a collection of fables and fairy tales to help teach the young about morality and kindness. However, the idea was corrupted, renamed the Bible, and a religion was built around it. Story 75. Franz Ferdinand's car took a wrong turn in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. Story 76. That one night when Alois and Clara Hitler had a little too much schnapps, and she became pregnant. Story 77. The person who forgot to close the gate and started the Great Chicago Fire. Story 78. Franz Ferdinand's driver, the Austrian Crown Prince, made a wrong turn in Sarajevo in 1914, causing the car to stop right in front of Gavrilo Princip, the assassin. If that simple mistake had not happened, the assassination probably would not have succeeded. That incident sparked the start of World War I. Story 79. Maybe not an accident, but an accidental wrong turn by a driver. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was visiting Sarajevo with his wife Sophie. A group of young Bosnian Serb nationalists plotted to kill him. The first attempt failed. A bomb was thrown at his motorcade but missed, injuring bystanders. Later, after a tense reception at City Hall, the Archduke insisted on visiting the wounded in the hospital. His driver, unfamiliar with Sarajevo, mistakenly turned onto a side street, right past a cafe where one of the conspirators, Gavrilo Princip, was having a drink, despondent that the plan had failed. Princip saw the Archduke's open car stop almost in front of him. He drew his pistol and fired twice, killing both Franz Ferdinand and Sophie. Those two bullets set off the chain reaction of ultimatums, alliances, and mobilizations that became the First World War. This led directly to World War II, the Holocaust, the development of nuclear weapons, the founding of the State of Israel, the Cold War, and more. A driver made a wrong turn 111 years ago, and we are still dealing with the echoes and repercussions. Story 80. Maybe not the largest impact on human history, but a tasty one. A melted chocolate bar in the pocket of engineer Percy Spencer led to the invention of the microwave oven. What if he had preferred to snack on pretzels or carrot sticks? How much longer would it have taken to develop microwave ovens? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.